We start right now, though, with the quest for accountability for this Capitol riot. New heat on Republicans as those police officers' stark testimony is sinking in across the nation. Meanwhile, one of Donald Trump's most intense defenders in Congress, Jim Jordan, who was not allowed on the committee, seeming to now suggest that he talked with Trump on that fateful day.
Did you talk to the former president that day?
I've talked to the former president umpteen times, thousands. I mean, not thousands
on
times,
January
but countless times. I talk to the president. I never talk about what we talk about because I just don't think that's appropriate. Just like I don't talk about what happens in Republican conferences. So
Sure.
I've talked to the president numerous times. I continue to talk to the president since he's left office.
on January 6th, Congressman.
Yes, I mean, I've talked to the president. I've talked to the president so many. I can't remember all the days I've talked to him, but I've certainly talked to the president.
Now, amidst some kind of hedging there, Jordan does sound pretty clear that they did talk, which raised questions about whether this was during the violence, so memorably caught on tape. Did Trump reveal more of his actions in real time? We're now looking at a former president under criminal investigation for efforts to overturn the election that made him an ex-president. So Jordan's firsthand account could make Congressman Jordan a relevant witness for this House committee or that open criminal probe in Georgia. As for yesterday's hearing, Jordan is one of several Republicans trying this out, saying, well, he missed it while working. The top House Republican, Kevin McCarthy, hitting a similar theme. And same for the Senate leader of the Republican Party, Mitch McConnell. Then there's the newest member of Republican leadership who was added as a more loyal Trump alternative to Liz Cheney, famously over these issues. I'm talking about Congresswoman Stefanik, who refuses to say whether she followed that committee hearing at all. Now, these answers are not exactly profiles in courage, but they matter tonight, and I'll tell you briefly why. They underscore some of the fear behind this current Republican facade over the riot and the insurrection. The truth is, Republican leaders have not figured out a coordinated plan for dealing with a probe that is very clearly damning for Trump, because while we can be as fair and legalistic as possible about the definition of incitement, he called those people to Washington. Everybody knows that. He gave them that rally and speech, and then they marched in and tried to overthrow your government and your democracy. Everybody knows that. It's also incriminating for many elected Republicans, not all, but many. Now, what did they do about all this? Well, the Republican Party tried to sabotage the hearing that everyone just saw yesterday. They lost that gambit when Pelosi booted the Jim Jordans of the world off the committee, so we didn't have half or more of the time spent on their stuff. Then the Republican Party turned to a boycott to try to argue that this probe would be automatically partisan. A talking point completely diluted by Speaker Pelosi because she just added Republicans herself. So a couple things didn't work. Now they're betting if they just say, there's nothing to see here, I was so busy at work I didn't see it, that maybe a lot of Americans will agree. Okay. But there is something to see here. It's the worst attack on our Capitol in the modern era. There is something to watch here. And there are conservatives with a lot more influence than the average Republican member of Congress who clearly get that. Over on Fox, they're not using this sort of new McCarthy-McConnell 4.0 line now that they've been outmaneuvered by Pelosi. Over on Fox News, they're not pretending they don't know what happened in that committee hearing. Indeed, these hearings were partly carried on Fox itself because they were so big they couldn't avoid them. They were also carried on several news networks, NBC, ABC. And those, as a matter of what reaches voters, those networks draw even more viewers than cable. So the Fox crowd, the people over on that network, they know Americans are hearing about this. And they're taking a different tack. They're turning on the police. They are arguing those people, those officers who risk their lives, are engaged in some kind of theater.
Democrats today picked 4 carefully curated police officers to testify as the voice of the law enforcement community.
The theatrics were intended to produce an emotional reaction. Logic and facts be damned. God save us from these third-rate theatrics. Now, the award for best use of an exaggeration in a supporting role. The winner's Aquilino Gonell, who thinks the pen is literally mightier than the sword.
Where to begin? Well, the media arm of the conservative movement, which rallied around a reality TV show star to run the country, now has a problem with theatrics. the people who claim Blue Lives Matter have decided the most important color here is actually MAGA red. Everyone knows the expression, a hit dog will holler. These riot enablers are clearly hit. They are hollering. And they understand something both obvious and tragic across America, including many conservative areas. A debate between criminal MAGA rioters and brave police officers is not even close, which is why on this one, the police get the last word.
I recall thinking to myself, this is how I'm going to die.
What I witnessed and experienced on January 6, 2021 was unlike anything I had ever seen.
Another takes a different tack, shouting, "You will die on your knees."
There was an attack carried out on January 6th, and a hitman sent them.
I'm joined now by the former RNC chairman, Michael Steele, Caddy K from Aussie Media, the Washington editor there, and from Mother Jones, David Korn. Michael, I walked through the recent history, even if it's a little depressing and monotonous, because it seems clear that the Republican leadership in Congress doesn't know how to play this. Pelosi has sort of checkmated them several times. And the media arm over at Fox, they seem to understand this is not something you can just piece out on. They seem to understand that this police testimony, if it goes far enough and continues, means something.
Yeah, and I think that's why you have the responses you have from the talking heads that you displayed in the opening part of the segment, where the only thing that was curated was their responses. We could have predicted the responses here. I mean, at the end of the day, the MAGA-loving pro-police crowd is just more MAGA-loving than they are pro-police. And the reality is setting in, not just politically having been outmaneuvered and their bluffs called several times by the Speaker of the House, but the reality of it is that this narrative exposes so much about what's rotten right now inside the core of my party. And, in addition to that, you also have let's keep up with the Newsmax crowd who's stealing our audience. So a lot of this becomes a play to kind of pull back some of those Fox viewers. But the reality still remains for Fox and a lot of these folks pushing this stuff that the rest of us see it and know it for what it is. Our eyes aren't lying to us here, folks. Right? We watched it unfold real time. I don't need Fox to describe or otherwise curate an answer for me or a response, because I saw it. And that is the hardest piece of evidence for them to come up against.
Yeah, I hear that. Caddy, let me play a little bit more from an officer here discussing, I guess, what has become this back and forth about theater and entertainment. Take a look.
What does concern me is the fact that, those entertainers have an audience, and that audience takes their words and, the rhetoric that they use as more than just entertainment. They think it's real. And that thought process has real life consequences. I mean, we saw the results of that on January 6th.
Caddy, there's something a little, I guess it's disturbing that someone in this position has to go out here as an officer and engage on all this. I mean, I get what's happening. I also think in a way it's a sad statement about where we're at. But he's sort of doing the work through what is this committee process and through that interview I just showed to remind people that it's not all fun and games and quote unquote rhetoric, and don't take him literally when this is the result, Caddy.
Yeah, I mean, it's depressing that these officers who went through, as they said, hell on January the 6th to defend members of Congress have to wake up to the fact that those members of Congress say they're too busy to even listen to their testimony during the hearing. I mean, the level of disrespect, just on a human, personal level, seems pretty astonishing. I mean, Officer Fanone in that interview also kind of quite rightly said, understood the theatrics of this and said that when you get people mocking the police officers for what they said during their testimony, it was a kind of an indication of weakness, really, from the other side. He said, look, I've testified before defense lawyers before, and I know in a courtroom when they start coming out with the theatrics, that's where they're on the weakest ground. And he had a full understanding of that. I just thought that the two things of mocking them and then saying, well, actually, we just didn't even have time to watch, just shows the level of disrespect that Republican members of Congress seem to be showing to these officers who